Well, good day. This is Lawrence Holgate, reading from my book, Understanding John Locke, The Smart Student's Guide to Locke's Second Treatise of Government. We are moving quite along now. We're in Chapter 9 of the book, which would be Episode 14, which we're now doing. The title of this chapter is The Ends of Political Society, so let's get on with it. Locke's use of the word property is more extensive than its use in ordinary conversation. When I say to you that something is my property, I'm usually understood to mean that it is owned or possessed by me and I have a right to possess it, enjoy it, or dispose of it. And examples would include physical objects like houses, land, furniture, clothing, cats, dogs, and sadly, sometimes, human beings. Non-physical examples of property include intellectual property, for example, inventions, literary and artistic works, designs, symbols, names and images used in commerce. But John Locke uses the word property to refer to, quote, lives, liberties, and estates. And that sounds strange. I don't think we would call these property. Locke would probably group all the things in the previous paragraph that we just discussed, cats, dogs, etc., under the estates category. Well, this leaves us wondering how lives and liberties could also be among the things we own and possess. And yet, we should be mindful that we do sometimes say of a person who has committed murder that she has taken the victim's life. And when a man has kidnapped another person, he has taken away her liberty. This implies that life and liberty are things that a person has, enjoys, and can lose, even while admitting that the murderer does not possess, literally, the life of the man he murdered, and the kidnapper does not possess the liberty of the person he is holding. I can transfer ownership of my car, but I cannot transfer ownership of my life or my liberty. These rights are, what we say, are inalienable. Let's get on now to section 9.1 of chapter 9, so we can dig a little deeper on this. Threats to the enjoyment of property. In the state of nature, man is, according to Locke, quote, the absolute lord of his own person and possessions, equal to the greatest and subject to nobody. Well, if that's true, then why would he part with his freedom? Why would he give it up? Locke writes that the answer is obvious. Most men are not strict observers of equity and justice. We may have a natural law that includes equity and justice, but Locke says most men are not strict observers of it, paragraph 123 in Second Treatise. Locke has a rather low regard of human nature. He later writes of the corruption and viciousness of degenerate men. These men may be aware of the prescriptions of the law of nature, not to harm another in their life, health, liberty, or possessions, but they're going to ignore these prohibitions, and they will kill, injure, kidnap, or steal from others to promote their own private interest. They are prepared to risk that they will not be noticed, caught, and punished. Even if these men were made aware of the existence of the natural law, this knowledge would not be sufficient to constrain their vicious behavior. They'd just laugh at us if we said, well, there's a law of nature. But since we're in nature itself, governed only by a natural law, they would just go on doing what they do. Now compare those remarks to the character Glaucon in Plato's Republic, who said 2100 years earlier than Locke that it would be stupid for anyone strong enough to get away with injustice or to abide by any contract requiring them to refrain from killing, assaulting, or stealing others. These are the same people who, in the state of nature, would be among Locke's group of degenerate men, those men who do not observe equity and justice. Section 9.2. The state of nature has defects, and Locke's going to give us at least three of them. And then we'll talk about remedies. But first, what are the defects? First, there is no established, settled, known law in the state of nature. An established law is a law to which everyone consents and accepts as the only standard for determining right and wrong, and for settling any controversies that may arise between them. Although the law of nature is plain and intelligible to all rational creatures, Locke has previously pointed out that the nature of human beings is either to remain ignorant of the law or to promote their own private interests, despite what they believe the natural law tells them to do or not to do. Because they have the right to make their own law, or to interpret what they believe to be the natural law, they will deny that the law is binding upon them when applying it to any case in which someone might claim that they have violated the law. Okay, that's the first defect. There is no established, settled, known law. There is the law of nature, of course, but that's not sufficient. Somebody might give a different interpretation of that law than I would give. They might ignore it. They might not even know about it. So the second defect, the lack of a known and indifferent judge in the state of nature. Now, partiality is also at the root of this defect, since everyone in the state of nature has the right to judge not only the conduct of others, but their own conduct as well. Then passion and revenge are very apt to carry them too far and with too much heat in their own cases, as well as negligence and unconcernedness to make them too remiss in other men's. I know that's a heavy line of words. I'm quoting from paragraph 125 in Second Treatise. But he just means that everyone in the state of nature has a right to be the judge of themselves and others. And Locke means in that quote that it is difficult for some persons to restrain their desire for revenge. When they or a loved one is harmed or killed, they want to do much more than to retribute for their loss. And they can also be expected to not care at all if roles are switched and the offender is a loved one or a friend. The third defect of the state of nature is there is no power, a lack of power to execute the law. There is no power to execute the law. So let's imagine a case. Suppose that Griselda, residing in the state of nature, is certain that Hortense has violated the law of nature. She informs Hortense of this and tells her that the punishment will be to hand over one half of her crop of wheat. Well, Hortense refuses and threatens to kill Griselda if she makes any attempt to take the wheat. Griselda has no one to help her carry out the punishment. Griselda turns and flees after realizing that she is not able by force to execute the punishment. As Locke puts it, quote, such resistance many times makes the punishment dangerous and frequently destructive to those who attempt it. Here's a little side note. 250 years after the death of John Locke, the British legal philosopher H.L.A. Hart used an approximation of Locke's list of defects to show what would be necessary for a primitive community to become a civil society. If the community had a few rules of obligation, like do not kill, do not steal, etc., Hart says that there would be a defect, he called it a defect of uncertainty about these rules. Hart also follows Locke when he writes that a primitive society would suffer from a defect of inefficiency, of the diffuse social pressure by which rules are maintained. The punishment of reputed offenders would be left up to individuals who have been harmed or to vigilante groups seeking revenge. So there's H.L.A. Hart, one of our most famous legal philosophers, going back 300 years to talk again about the distinctions made by John Locke about what has to be remedied, what needs remedy because of the defects of the state of nature. So let's go on to paragraph 9.3 in chapter 9 of my book. Here's what Locke says. The path to repair these defects of the state of nature is to abandon it and take sanctuary under the established laws of government. However, Locke argues that an established government, or a civil society, can be achieved only if all persons agree to give up the two powers that humans have in the state of nature, the power of making one's own law and the power to punish. Locke says these have to be given up if we're going to crawl out of the state of nature into a civil society. First, giving up the power to make law. The power to do whatever one believes will preserve, that is, whatever one believes will preserve himself and everyone else, is best understood as the power to legislate or to make law for oneself or all others. In the state of nature, each person makes his or her own law, even though there is a natural law which anyone can use when creating one's private law. Hence, this power or right to legislate has to be handed over to the community, quote, to be regulated by laws made by the society. You can no longer make your own law. You are no longer a law unto yourself. And if we refuse to do this, then we will remain in the state of nature. As stated in an earlier episode, no civil society can exist when each person is a law unto himself or herself. Secondly, giving up the power to punish. Locke writes that the power of punishing has to be wholly given up, and he must combine his own physical force with the force of others to assist the executive power of the society, as the law requires. If each person is to enjoy the conveniences of the new society, then each must make a reciprocal effort to assist others in the new community when carrying out the crucial task of punishing offenders. Section 9.4, Limited Government. In the concluding paragraph of Chapter 9 of Second Treatise, Locke reminds us of the motivation of those who give up, quote, into the hands of society, the equality, the liberty, and the executive power that they had in the state of nature. They do this because they believe that creating a civil society will better preserve themselves, their liberty and property, than remaining in the state of nature. This is the rational choice. And Locke says, quote, no rational creature can be supposed to change his condition with an intention to be worse. And I'm going to go on with this quote at paragraph 131. And so whoever has the legislative or supreme power of any commonwealth is bound to govern by established standing laws, promulgated and known to the people, and not by extemporary decrees, by indifferent and upright judges who are to decide controversies by those laws, and to employ the force of the community at home only in the execution of such laws, or abroad, to prevent or redress foreign injuries and secure the community from inroads and invasion. In all of this, to be directed to no other end but the peace, safety, and public good of the people. End quote. The second point that Locke makes is about the limits to be placed on the legislative power. Although those who are given legislative power must use it to repair the defects of the state of nature, this is all they can use it for. The legislators are duty-bound to secure everyone's property, but they cannot use the legislative power to do more than this. Now, with these words, this is another side note, with these words, many would argue that Locke strongly implies the idea of limited government, prohibited from using the legislative power to enact laws that have nothing to do with the protection of property. And remember what property means: lives, liberty, etc. For example, taxes can be levied and extracted from each citizen, but only for paying the cost of the mechanics of protection. For example, a police force to catch and detain suspected criminals, a judiciary to decide guilt or innocence, or a military force to protect against foreign invasion. But the laws to be passed by the legislative body shall be only those laws that are designed to protect property. They cannot be used to fund education, museums, hospitals, health care, roads and roadwork, food and housing for the indigent, or any other project unrelated to the protection of life, liberty, health, and possessions. Now, other scholars have argued that securing the lives, liberty, and possessions of the people could go much farther than merely maintaining a police state. For example, if we take seriously Locke's endorsement of Richard Hooker's admonition way back in chapter 2. Hooker's admonition to pursue equality, and if we take seriously Locke's implied second law of nature, back at 2.3.2, I'll start that sentence over again. If we take seriously Locke and Hooker, all right, then government might have a more expansive role to play in the lives of its citizens. This might include paying for a system of public education, guaranteeing that all children have an equal opportunity to achieve the best life they can achieve. Perhaps a medical system that gives free access to health care for the poor. So there is some tension here between scholars who are trying to interpret John Locke's theory. Locke will have much more to say about the use and misuse of legislative power in Chapter 10 and in my next episode. So at this point, I shall leave you, and we'll see you at the episode to come.